All right, well, you can almost feel it in the air. More Americans are learning what most of you guys at home already knew, this whole progressive social experiments of social justice and defunding the police. Well, they've been a massive failure. Even New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is refunding his own police department. Most of the New York City mayoral candidates say the city can no longer afford to defund the police. Andrew Yang saying that most recently. That's what happens when a 4-year-old little girl gets shot in Times Square. The human flight response has been activated inside millions of Americans. They are sick of fighting these ultra-progressive policies championed by the likes of de Blasio, and they've given up. Lots of people are taking flight, fleeing to places like Texas and Florida, and a lot of them are running from places that seem to have one thing in common. They've elected district and state's attorneys backed by George Soros's progressive money machine, the Open Societies Foundation. We're talking about people like Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, Kim Gardner in St. Louis, Kim Foxx in Chicago, and George Casson in Los Angeles. All of them have watched crime rates skyrocket in their cities. Now, Soros spent at least $3 million on DA races in 2016 alone. This was reported by Politico. That money spent in places like Illinois, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Mexico, Texas, and Florida through a network of dark money super PACs, all of them under the banner of safety and justice. They supported candidates like Aramis Ayala, an anti-Second Amendment television analyst who gained notoriety during George Zimmerman's trial and the Trayvon Martin case. Now, the Open Societies Foundation also backed Baltimore District Attorney Marilyn Mosby, and for some reason, progressives still support her, even though homicides, rapes, aggravated assaults, burglaries, and robberies have exploded under Mosby's watch. Now, her political motivation and her political motivated investigation and prosecution, I should say, of the 6 Baltimore police officers charged in the Freddie Gray killing resulted in 3 of the officers' acquittals, and then Mosby was forced to drop the remaining charges against the other 3 officers. And also, the Obama Justice Department failed to bring any charges against the Baltimore Police Department when it came to civil rights violations. Baltimore descended into chaos as a result. It was another one of those bait and switch type scenarios, and Mosby remains employed still by the people of Baltimore somehow. Now, the local media in that city have started asking some tough questions about Mosby and her finances and who's paying for all of her travel. She travels a lot. Last summer, an independent news site called the Baltimore Brew reported that Mosby claimed at least $30,000 in travel expenses over 2018 and 2019, including airfare, hotel rooms, and per diem expenses. These were by far the largest travel reimbursements claimed by any elected official in Maryland, according to that report. Now, the people of Baltimore, understandably, might want to know why the city's top law enforcement official is spending so much time out of town, given the fact that crime was exploding in her backyard. Apparently, it's a pretty touchy subject. Now, Mosby doesn't like the attention, and her office wants it to stop. The state attorney's office there in Baltimore fired off a letter to the Federal Communications Commission, and they point out that there were about 250 stories on local TV stations in Baltimore solely about Mosby last year. Now, her communications director claims one station's coverage is, quote, blatantly slanted, dishonest, misleading, racist, and extremely dangerous. Mosby demands the FCC investigate the station. Meanwhile, it looks like Miss Mosby has other plans outside of Baltimore. She's like a lot of people. She wants to leave her progressive, crime-ridden city for a place like Florida. Take a look at this from the Baltimore Sun. According to this report in her latest ethics disclosure, Mosby recently bought at least one $500,000 Florida home near Orlando. There are also reports of a second condo purchased in Sarasota this year. Now, Mosby also disclosed that the IRS has filed a lien on all of her property for back taxes owed by her and her husband, Nick Mosby, who, by the way, is Baltimore's city council president. Now, last month, we learned from the Baltimore Sun as well that the Mosbys are also the target of a federal criminal investigation, and she has since gone on local radio to defend herself.
So I'll take the same approach to this investigation and everything else that is looming as I do all the others, and will cooperate as much as I can because I'm 100% confident that there will be no finding of wrongdoing or illegality on my part.
Now, if she's 100% confident, you might think she would welcome the media coverage. Now, we called Mosby's office this morning and her communications director, Zai Richardson, who actually wrote that letter. This was about 8:30 Eastern time this morning. We did not hear back. I did see that Miss Mosby tweeted that we were going to talk about her today, so she's got time for that, but not time to call us back. But let's welcome in now FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. He is concerned by this letter, as am I. He's called the letter chilling. Great to see you, Commissioner.
Oh, good to join you. Thanks for having me on.
Now, most people are dying for media coverage nowadays, but Ms. Mosby seems to want no part of it. Tell us what you found so concerning about this letter to the FCC.
I've been at the FCC for almost 10 years now, including a stint serving as the general counsel of the agency. And I have never seen anything like this. You've got the top prosecutor for a city, the state's attorney's office, filing a formal complaint at the FCC asking us to censor a newsroom because they're doing their constitutionally protected job of shining a light on the work of this office. The day after this complaint was filed, the Regional Edward Murrow Award for Journalism Excellence, 4 awards, went to this very same newsroom, including for coverage they've done looking at this exact same state's attorney's office.
Yeah, and here's a fact, that I think as someone who worked in local television for a long time, you have to tell this to people that it's not like being a priest. It's not like being a teacher. It's a commercial enterprise, and local television stations choose their stories based on, number one, the public interest, but what kind of ratings they're going to get. And if a station or multiple stations in the Baltimore Sun, they're going to do all this coverage of Marilyn Mosby, I would guess it's because it's commercially viable. The people of Baltimore are interested in this woman.
Yeah, look, this is just a chilling and direct assault on free speech, on journalistic freedom. And it's particularly troubling to me that the state's attorney's office would file this complaint while the state's attorney is currently under federal criminal investigation for financial dealings. And so I've called for my colleagues at the FCC to dismiss this complaint with prejudice. I said we should have done it before the day ended yesterday. That didn't happen. No newsroom should have a complaint like this hanging over their journalists for an hour or a minute too long. And so we passed that time. I'm disappointed it hasn't been dismissed. In the regulatory world, pulling a license for a broadcast TV station is the regulatory death penalty. Right. So we need to get rid of this. And frankly, it's part of a growing trend we're seeing where politicians increasingly on the left are looking to the FCC to shut down either news coverage they don't like or political speech they don't like. We had members of Congress write letters to cable channels asking them or pressuring them to drop this news channel itself. Yep. We had members of Congress out of Florida write a letter asking that we block the sale of a Florida radio station because
they talked about that one as well. That's another.
That would be too conservative.
And we keep seeing these encroachments on the First Amendment here. That was a wild story out of Miami where you had progressives concerned about conservatives buying Spanish language radio stations. Again, this is First Amendment stuff. The FCC licenses are very important, but you can see now how under a Democratic administration, it's almost an attempt to weaponize those FCC licenses and pull them away. Let's leave that aside because I want to talk with you, Commissioner, about social media and also polls. And I understand it's a little counterintuitive, but I'm going to use a poll to make my point here. There's a new NBC News poll that talks about most Americans think that Facebook and Twitter are doing more to divide the nation than to bring it together. In fact, 64% of Americans think social media platforms divide us. Just 27% believe they bring us together. What do you see as the FCC's role in regulating this type of communication? I always talk to people about, the federal airwaves exist so that the government can warn us of an alien attack or something like that. That's, kind of why we have these types of communication methods. But when it comes to social media, that's something different. How do you see the need to regulate this?
The FCC does have a role to play here. Section 230, which I think most people have come to recognize as a statutory provision over the past year or so, it gives special protections to social media companies, and courts over the years have read Section 230 as giving big tech carte blanche to engage in any and all forms of censorship, bias, or otherwise. That's not what Section 230 says. So I led the calls at the FCC for us to update our approach to Section 230 last year. Unfortunately, we didn't have the vote to get that across the finish line, but I'm now looking to work with state legislatures as well that are looking to pass laws to address the bias in the censorship that we see going on right now. I think more speech is always better than less speech.
That's right. That's right. And one of the things we often talk about, too, as we advocate for the First Amendment, sometimes it's the speech you don't like that you have to advocate for to make sure the First Amendment is as strong as it can be. All right. So I want to go back to the polls because, we often see certain posts on social media getting labeled as needing more context or being misleading here. But one of the most widely posted things I saw yesterday, especially coming from progressives, was a Associated Press ORC poll And we'll talk about both of these polls here. One which showed wide approval for President Biden, buoyed by his pandemic response, and also a recent CBS News poll that looked at the president's recent speech, and it showed most viewers approved of it. Now, the problem is these are the top lines, the headlines that get circulated from these polls, Commissioner, but when you dig down into the crosstabs, you see something here. In that AP poll, you can notice, and they admit this, that 46% of the people that they surveyed admitted to being Democrats, just 37% admitted to being Republican. So there's a 9-point differential in those they surveyed. So of course you think it's going to be skewed. And then with the CBS poll, 54% identified as progressive or liberal, and just it's a little hard to read here, but just 18% identified as Republicans or conservative or strongly conservative. So a lot of times the bias is built right into these polls, but it gets circulated as fact, and there's no asterisk or needs context when this stuff goes viral on social media.
It looks pretty skewed, and I think this is part and parcel of why we've seen over the years a big gap between those inside the Beltway and the rest of the country. Is, we're hearing this information, and it's not an accurate reflection of where the American people are. And I think anyone in D.C., myself included, the best way to do this job is to spend as little time in Washington as possible. So I've tried to spend time in a lot of the rural communities that we're working to bring high-speed internet connections to. And if you hear directly from people and regulate based on that, that's far better than looking to these polls that can be quite skewed, as you pointed out.
Yeah, one of the things I lament all the time about the absence of the Trump administration was that initiative to get so much of the federal bureaucracy out of Washington, D.C. into the heartland. And I was also laughing out loud at your post recently. Follow Brendan on social media, by the way, especially on Twitter. Hilarious post of you and John Thune in North Dakota when you said he Rosalind Cartered you, because he is a pretty tall guy. I don't know how tall you are, but the picture was misleading. But talk to us real quick. We got about 30 seconds left. I mean, this is an area where Democrats and Republicans agree there needs to be more rural broadband access. You could easily pass, I think, a skinny bill focusing just on that. But of course, where's the political will to do something that requires that much common sense?
Yeah, there was a lot in the Biden infrastructure proposal that had nothing to do with infrastructure. I think the broadband piece was an exception to that. They proposed $100 billion. One challenge is we have $40 billion sitting at the FCC right now that is unspent to bridge the digital divide. So my focus is let's get that $40 billion out the door before we saddle additional debt on the American people. And if we need more, let's come up with a targeted plan for doing that. Yeah,
let's get the ball rolling, though, and get rural broadband to where it needs to be, to the folks out there in the heartland of America. Commissioner Brendan Carr from the FCC, great talk. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, where real news for real people.